Woman was not the same as woman-man. There were no devices, no tactics, no ammunition that the other didn't have as well. No excuses served as camouflage. The battle for each other was fought unarmed, head-on. She expected more from a woman than a man, and, recognizing this, Cynthia was stunned. Dave was tired, but Angela was lazy. Dave, clumsy, Angela, careless. Dave had his mind on important matters, but Angela was simply inattentive. Cynthia demanded no less of Angela than she demanded of herself. And in the act of love, she and Dave came close together, parted and returned and parted, two hands applauding. Martha and Abigail, she and Angela, Cynthia winced, embarrassed, remembering, were two hands clasped. Angela did not look into Cynthia's eyes romantically, as Dave did. She looked through them, past them, into the dark and vulnerable place beyond. There was no hiding from a woman, and Cynthia trembled, afraid of that dark and previously inviolate place which Angela had invaded. Cynthia was unable to remember what she'd hidden there. That was from this book, Burning, by Jane Chambers. And this was my read for week 2 of Horror Mayhem, hosted by the Bookish Bryants. And this week's theme was Gothic horror. And I'd had this book sitting on my shelf for a while. This is a really old, beat-up Jove paperback. It got a rave review from Will Erickson at Too Much Horror Fiction. And so I bought this copy like 4 or 5 years ago, always meaning to read it. Never got around to it, and this event gave me the perfect excuse. You know, looking at it, I mean, you wouldn't expect much from it. It's kind of just your generic horror, 70s era horror paperback. Although the garish cover art by Rowan Amoral is really, really awesome. Although the garishness of said cover art might be a bit misleading, because while there's horror elements in this, I would say that it definitely leans much more into the gothic side of things than the horror. But it's really interesting, really beautiful, and has a lot of surprising things to say considering the time it was written. So this book is about two women, Cynthia and Angela. Cynthia is an older woman, sort of middle-aged, early 40s. She's married to her husband Dave, who works as a talent scout or an agent for actors, getting them jobs and stuff. And he's kind of struggling with his business, and she suggests that they go on vacation. And one of his actor clients has a house out in the wilderness that they're willing to let them use for the summer. And they bring Angela along with them. Angela is a younger woman, 19 years old. She's sort of Cynthia's assistant, kind of like, she's sort of a jack of all trades. She's her assistant. She helps out take care of the kids. She's sort of like a babysitter. And so they all travel together to this cabin in the wilderness to spend their vacation. The women go up first. It's just them and their children, them and Cynthia's children. She has a daughter and a son. And while exploring the house, she finds this old dusty room full of cobwebs and old furniture that seems to date from the 17th century. And the room seems to have this strange hold over her. And not only her, but Angela as well. Both women end up sort of being possessed by the spirits of these two women who are implied to maybe be them in a past life or something like that. And the two women, Abigail, which is Angela's counterpart, and Martha, who is Cynthia's counterpart, were both women who were alive in the 17th century, who lived together, who had a lesbian relationship together, and basically went through this horrible series of events that culminates in the title. And so these two modern women are possessed by the spirits of these older women, and sort of forced to carry out their fate, with them, being lovers, meeting each other, becoming lovers. And on top of that, there's a lot more going on. There's a third man. There's another man involved named Red Richmond. Who is sort of your typical man's man type. He's very big and buff and very friendly, and he ends up being possessed as well by his ancestor, who is a squire, and is sort of pining for Abigail. And also her son ends up getting involved as well, who he ends up sort of being possessed by the son of Martha, who is living out in this house in the middle of nowhere. And so basically, what follows is this very tragic tale of sort of as it says here, love that defied the grave. And it's very, very gothic in terms of its setting, the sort of machinations of the characters, the sense of foreboding of secrets being kept and slowly uncovered throughout the story. But one of the things that surprised me the most about it was that this was originally published in 1978, and for a novel that was published in 1978, it's surprisingly progressive in terms of its depiction of love between two women. Jane Chambers makes it very clear throughout the novel that they are not bad people because of their lesbianism. The Angela and or Abigail and Martha are not bad people. That they're persecuted by the culture that in the time period that they live in, but that doesn't make them evil. And there's lots of moments of lyrical beauty and eroticism between the two women, which again was very shocking for the time period. It's surprisingly open-minded. And one of the other interesting things about it, of course, is that it deals with gender and sexuality, obviously. But the interesting thing that Jane Chambers does is how she contrasts the ancient with the modern. So in the historical time period, we're following this sort of twisted love triangle between Abigail, Martha, and the squire. I won't give the plot details away, but you can imagine kind of what happens probably. And what I found interesting about that was that so she has this historical time period, and then that's then contrasted with the modern time that the book takes place in, where they're sort of the characters in the novel think of themselves as like progressive. They think of themselves as liberals. There's a thing in here from Cynthia where she talks about how she was a liberal in intent. In that like she had gay friends and she brought a black man to dinner one time and that kind of stuff. But being forced to sort of confront the reality of this lesbian relationship and Angela's own feelings for her kind of forces her to confront what it really means to exist as a marginalized person in society, to have that kind of forbidden love. And one of the other interesting things is how people's reactions to that love in the modern day, as I said, is contrasted with people's reactions to that love in the historical time period. And there's this sort of melancholy to it, where it seems to be saying that we've come a long way, but in a lot of ways, things are very much the same. I don't mean to just make it sound kind of just like a dry, like, feminist treatise about, the lesbian women are all pure and good, and the heterosexual men are all bad people. She makes it very clear in the novel that everyone in the book is bound by their duties, their fates, the society, the expectations that society places on them that basically keep them from being sort of their freest, most open selves. The squire, Red's descendant, and Red himself talk frequently about having to suppress their emotions, about being afraid of being seen as girly or too fanciful, and how their expectations for how things like love and romance are supposed to go sort of color their emotions to the events that happen later. And Angela or Abigail and Martha and Cynthia and Angela, they're very flawed characters. They're imperfect. Cynthia is forced to confront her sort of fake liberalism and her newfound feelings for this girl. Angela, is a young woman who doesn't really know what she wants out of life, and kind of clings to this past life, this possession, as sort of a summation of like everything that she was fantasizing about, everything that she wanted. But the book doesn't go where you might think it does. It doesn't necessarily. It ends on a very bittersweet note, one that I thought was surprisingly somber and mature. For the time period. I thought it was very interesting. And also one of the other things that I found very interesting was that there's a lot in the book about, female liberation, about love for your fellow woman, that kind of thing. And yet, in both the past and the present, the women are bound by their men, even as they're saying all this, sort of women's lib stuff. So in the modern day, Cynthia is very doting on her son. She's very protective of him, and that leaves out her daughter, Janet. Janet has this whole sequence where she feels angry and jealous over the fact that, the boy gets all the attention and she's just a girl and she's just kind of supposed to be there, because the man is the one that will have to go out and do things, whereas like she just kind of has to exist, and then in the historical sequences, Cynthia and Angela are very protective of the son's past self. The whole reason that Martha is sitting up there in this house on the top of a hill away from everybody is because she had a child out of wedlock, and she basically doesn't want anybody to know about it because, of course, having a child out of wedlock back then is like the worst thing. So in both the present and the past, they're kind of bound by, they're almost chained by their the expectations that society places on them in terms of men and having to be there for men, having to take care of men, which I thought was really, really interesting. So they espouse all of this liberating female empowerment, lesbian love, and it's beautiful and it's right, but at the same time they're still bound by these same problems and issues and societal expectations that they were dealing with in the past. And I think that's kind of what the book seems to be doing by sort of contrasting these two things, how, the past isn't so different from the present, not as different as we think it is. I don't want to give anything away, but it just, the ending was dynamite. I just thought it brought all the themes of the book together in a great way. It was tense, it was scary. It just surprised me, the level of lyricism and sort of understanding of sort of the battle of the sexes, the male and female psyche and how they respond to things in terms of, gender and sexuality, as I've said before, the expectations that society places on them. It's so much more than you would think from this kind of, beat up old paperback. And I looked up Jane Chambers just because I was curious if there was any information about her. And she actually was a lesbian playwright who wrote many very successful plays in the 70s and 80s. And she died of cancer, unfortunately, in the 80s. But she was a very prominent lesbian writer. But this was her first novel, and I don't know. You can tell that she's a playwright because it's very dialogue heavy. It's very insular. It's more about like the interpersonal drama than like action. But it's very well written. It's very sad, very elegiac, very beautiful, very lyrical, very erotic too, which, as I said, was surprising for the time period. So yeah, this definitely is sort of a very surprising, very interesting little hidden gem that I was really, really happy to have read. And if I'm somehow I'm able to find more of her stuff out in the wild, more of her novels, or if I can somehow get a hold of her plays, it would be interesting to see what those were like too. I'm kind of sad she never wrote much more after this in terms of novels, because it would have been interesting to see what other stories she could have tackled. I really, really liked it. I'm really glad I read it, and so that was my book for week 2 of Horror Mayhem, Burning by Jane Chambers. Next week is Cosmic Horror, and you'll see what I'm reading for that next week. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye.